Alright you guys, what is going on and welcome back to the channel. It is a brisk 30 degrees outside, but that is not going to stop us today. We got our clutch in for the engine, so I'm stoked. We're gonna get this thing put back in the car today. I don't want to have a motor sitting on the stand any longer than I have to, and it's been ready to go back in the car. So I did a couple things off camera before filming. All I did was pull off the header. I double checked the valve cover gaskets. I put like a couple dabs of sealant on it. Not over the entire thing. It's just not needed since we have a brand new seal in there, but the motor's ready to go in. So here is our whole clutch setup. That's kind of nice. So we have the ACT Street Light flywheel, and then the ACT, I believe this is the Stage 2 full face sprung HD Extreme, I want to say it is. I don't remember. I think it's rated up to like 520 foot-pounds of torque, so this thing should hold all of our power just fine. I did order the mono lock collar for this system. It's like that little yellow box right there, but I'll just use it with that X clutch that I have down there. It came with one, so that's awesome that it came with a new mono lock collar. It does not come with new flywheel bolts, so I just happen to have some laying around that I was going to be using for the H6 or the EJ257 and the other STI, so I'll just order a new set of bolts for that since that motor isn't even back yet. We're not even worried about that one right now. So I'll get a new set of these bolts ordered for that motor, but luckily I did have some brand new flywheel bolts laying around. It does come with a new pilot bearing, but if you order the flywheel, it comes with the pilot bearing pre-installed. We get the new throwout bearing right here. Some of the original hardware that you guys are going to reuse is you're going to reuse your clutch fork unless you're buying a brand new one. You're going to be using the pivot slide thing guy, that thing. You're going to be reusing that, and then make sure that you guys still have this plug if your motor's been sitting around for a little while. I'll show you where that goes. And finally, it does come with the clutch alignment tool and then some install instructions. I don't really need these aside from just the torque specs, so I'll just be using that for the torque specs. This is pretty straightforward. Whenever it comes to replacing a clutch in Subarus, you have ideally two ways of doing it. You can either go in and drop the transmission, which I don't suggest doing it that way. I fully believe that pulling the motor and doing the clutch that way is 1,000 times easier than dropping the transmission. The transmission's just such a pain to get out of these cars. I just didn't want to mess with it, so we're doing it this way. Obviously the motor had to come out anyways. So like I said, all I've done on this is pull off the exhaust manifold. I pulled off the intake manifold, but we need to get the motor off of the engine stand because obviously we need to gain access to the back side of the motor where the engine stand is mounted up to be able to get our new flywheel and everything like bolted on. So first thing I'm going to do is get the throwout bearing and the clutch fork put back in the transmission. I will get this thing thrown on a tripod and kind of show you guys what you have to do on this part. It's pretty simple and straightforward, so there's not too much you got to worry about for right here. So this part's relatively easy and straightforward. If you guys don't have any molly grease, get some molly grease. You can get it on Amazon, AutoZone, anywhere local to you. I just got this at AutoZone. I've had it in the garage for a little while since we did the BRZ's clutch. You don't need to go ham with this stuff. Just be like very gentle, get things nice and lubricated a little bit. So before you start going in and throwing like grease and like parts, absolutely, oh, I dropped the molly grease. Get back here. There we go. So before you go in there and you start throwing like parts in here, greasing things up, make sure you do clean the input shaft. Make sure you clean the rear shaft portion. I don't know the technical name for it, but make sure you clean that as well. You don't want like particulate on there because that's where the throwout bearing is going to slide. After you get that cleaned up, throw a little bit of molly grease on this backside and the input shaft just so you have some good slidage for the throwout bearing. And then we're going to start getting some stuff in here. So I've already done that aspect of things. So first up is we're going to go ahead and get our throwout bearing kind of set up and on our clutch fork. So anywhere that there is metal on metal contact, just put a little bit of molly grease. You don't need a ton. You don't want a ton either because if you have too much molly grease in there, it's just going to start flinging grease around inside of the transmission casing. If you get that stuff on the friction disc of the clutch, it's not going to have a good time. So just get everything lubed up. That's going to be metal on metal contact. So the only areas that I got lubed up were inside of the throwout bearing, right inside of that seal, and then on the two little arms where the clutch fork sits. So now that we have those greased up, we're going to go ahead and get our clutch fork slid through his home right up there, and then just going to let him sit right there for a minute, and then we'll get our clutch fork slid into him. So we'll get our throwout bearing on there, and then our clutch fork will slide right on like that. Looking beautiful. And then we can get this pivot shaft in there. So this is just what the clutch fork rides on. So make sure you get a good amount of molly grease on here. Like I said, don't go ham with it. You don't need a ton. You just need a nice light layer. Also make sure that you do clean this pivot shaft before throwing it in there also, just because you don't want a whole bunch of like extra particulate in there if you can avoid that. And then you're going to go through the back side of the whole casing where you pulled it out from before, and then make sure that it seats in the grooves properly. If it doesn't seat in the grooves, it's not going to be fully in there and you're not going to be able to get the plug on all the way. There is a threaded hole on the outside of that shaft like I've shown you guys multiple times. You can use intake manifold bolts to pull those out or push them in. I'm just going to be using one of those bolts just to get it threaded in there enough so that way I can get it turned, so that way it sits inside of the little shaft piece in there. And then last up for this portion is just to get the plug back on there. So I'm just gonna put a dab of blue Loctite on here, just so it doesn't back out over time. We'll get that threaded in. I'll bring the camera up, I'll show you guys kind of this whole setup here, and then we'll get the motor off the stand, start getting the flywheel and the clutch put on that guy. So to give you guys a closer look on this, clutch fork is going to sit right up here. As you can see, we have free movement on the throwout bearing and the clutch fork right there, so nothing is binding. Everything feels nice and smooth on that. We have our small plug put in right there. I've shown you guys that in multiple other videos, and then everything is lubed up. So like I said, you're gonna want to lube up this rear sliding shaft guy. I don't know the technical name, like I said, the input shaft, that slide piece that goes in right there, and it's pretty much good. I'm gonna put a small dab of moly grease on the backside of the clutch fork once we get everything in there, just so that way the master cylinder isn't just binding up against the clutch fork right there. So now that that's kind of situated, let me get the motor off the stand, let me put on a tire, and then we can start getting the friction disc, the flywheel, all that good stuff thrown on. All right, our motor is off the engine stand. That's what I'm talking about. So now we're ready to get the flywheel on here. This is gonna be fun doing it by myself. I might have Matt come down and help me because I need to torque those down while somebody holds the crank, so that way the crank just doesn't spin on me and I'm not able to torque him down. Let me run through this. I'm just gonna get the flywheel bolted up on there. All you gotta do is get it set up. Actually, you know, I'll just walk you guys through it. So we are ready to put our flywheel on. So this is ACT's flywheel. I am gonna have Matt come down and help me with this because he's gonna hold the crank for me while I get this guy on here. But we're just gonna get it lined up with the holes on here, just like that. I'm gonna get one bolt in here just to hold it down. So that bolt's just gonna hold it down real quick. I'm gonna get some Loctite put on the rest of the bolt. I'm using red Loctite. You can use blue, purple, red. I would highly suggest red though. What happens if you mix blue and red Loctite?
Purple!
How strong is it?
Your colors?
How strong does it become?
Kind of strong.
So I'm gonna go ahead and get a little bit of red Loctite thrown in on the rest of the flywheel bolts going around here. After they're all just hand tightened down, you wanna do this in a star pattern also. You don't wanna just like go around in a circle. It's not gonna let the flywheel like sit properly and can cause issues later. So I'm just gonna go through here, start getting a little bit of red Loctite on all these after I get them like hand tight. Matt's gonna hold the crank for us. We're gonna tighten them all down to 55.3 foot-pounds, not inches, pounds, foot-pounds, because that's what we want, right? So small issue, if you are doing this, not only do they not give you flywheel bolts, they also don't give you the pressure plate bolts. So I have no idea what happened to the ones that I had. Matt and I were able to find 9 that look like they might be the pressure plate bolts, but Subaru has 6 in stock. So we're gonna go grab 6 brand new ones first and then reuse like whatever one of these old ones that we have to, just to kind of like make sure that all hardware is fresh in there. But like, in any of this packaging, no bolts, no bolts. Luckily, between like EJ257 stuff and STI stuff, I was able to find 9. So we're gonna run down to Subaru, go grab 9 or 6 of these bolts that they have in stock, come up, and then we'll get the pressure plate put on and hopefully get the motor back in the car. So we just got back down from Subaru. Matt was kind enough to drive us up there wherever he disappeared to. He's somewhere back there. He's like right back there. We're wearing matching hoodie. If you don't have a drive hoodie, grab a drive hoodie. But anyways, we were able to get 6 new bolts for the pressure plate, and then we have a handful of ones from previous cars. I don't know if it's off of the 17 STI, the EJ33, the 05 STI. I have no idea what these bolts are off of, but they are pressure plate bolts. We do know that much, so we only have to reuse 3 of those ones. So now we can actually get the friction disc mated up and the pressure plate on there, and then we get the motor back in the car. Before we even get the friction disc on here with the pressure plate, we need to go through here and clean this off with some brake clean. I'm just gonna spray some on a rag, wipe this down just to get the oil off. They put like a small film of oil along this just so it doesn't rust in shipping and when it's sitting in a warehouse. So we'll get that cleaned off, we'll get the friction disc lined up, we'll get the pressure plate on, and then it's ready to go back in the car because I already have the throwout bearing on the trans. So we've got the flywheel on, well, we've got the flywheel, the throwout bearing is on the transmission, obviously. Friction disc and clutch pressure plate is all on here. Everything is torqued down. All of these bolts, like I said, do it in a star pattern when you're doing this. They all get torqued down to about 11.5 foot-pounds, which is like 151 inch-pounds or something. I don't know. I'll put the conversion like down there. We took this off and put it back on because we wanted to make sure that the friction disc was as straight as possible. So when you're doing this and you're actually like in there lining everything up with the clutch alignment tool, make sure it's as straight as possible. It's just going to make your life 1,000 times easier when it comes to trying to shove this thing back in and get it to line up on the splines of the actual transmission. So now that we have that good to go, this thing is now ready to go back in the car, finally. Well, it's only been on the stand, what, a couple weeks? Hasn't been on the stand too long. So we're gonna get this thing thrown in the car, get it everything like bolted back up, get the starter on. Matt gave us some different phenolic spacer TGV gasket dealio, some OEM ones that are a little bit better than those, so we'll swap those out. Also, I want to get the AC compressor bolted back up on here and a couple other smaller things, just so it's just less stuff we got to do later. So let's get this thing back in the car and get it, but this part's gonna suck. Matt and I got the motor in relatively easily. One thing that we did have a concern about when mating the trans up to the motor was the dowel pin. So you've got two locating dowel pins on the trans that line up with the motor. They didn't look like they wanted to go in. They were lined up. It just took a little finoodling to be able to get them in there. We got all of the bolts that hold the bell housing of the engine to the bell housing of the transmission. So it is like on there. Pitch stops back on here. Motor mounts are tightened down. Transmission mount is tightened down because we did loosen the two 14 millimeters that hold the transmission mount to the transmission cross bracing. I was just going to pull the whole cross brace off. Matt was like, no, don't do it. There's no need to do it. Just undo the 214. So we just did that. Everything's like solid in here fitment wise. We did test the clutch. Everything feels perfect. I did kidnap the clutch return spring off of the 17 STI for up here. A couple tips for you guys when you're going through and doing this. Like I said, it is incredibly easier to pull the motor and do the clutch this way than it would be to drop the transmission. It's just so much more work trying to work underneath the car with not a lot of room, especially if you're on jack stands like I am. I mean, yes, there is more room down there than there would be if you were just like jack up the front end of the car only, but it's just so much easier to pull the motor and do it this way. And then also when you're doing this, you need to get the transmission and the engine at the same angle or else they're not going to line up and you're going to be sitting out here fighting with it forever. So just those key things. Make sure that the pressure plate or the friction disc on the pressure plate is lined up accordingly. Make sure that the engine and the transmission are at the same angle so that way they slide right in, and then you can start getting some of the bell housing bolts in just to get it to line up and actually like suck itself to the transmission. So now that this is in, there's a couple things in here that I'm going to run through and clean up. We're just going to time lapse through it. I did get the AC compressor bolted back down so that way it's not tucked away in the battery tray area, but I'm going to get like the heater core lines going back to the firewall bolted up, the AC, or not the AC, the starter wiring put back in, and a couple small things just to clean this up real quick so that way it doesn't look like a complete wiring mess in here. So let's get that knocked out and then we might do a couple smaller things tonight. So once again, it got dark out very quickly. That happens in the winter time, but this is about where I'm going to stop tonight. So all we've done, the intake manifold is just set on here. It's not actually bolted on. All I went through and did was get all the wiring situated. That was the main priority for tonight, just so that way all the wiring's kind of done with, out of the way. So the whole harness is plugged back in. Everything that we're not using, like evap, TGV deletes, all of that is like taped up, tucked away to where it's not going to be in our way for anything else that we're doing. Tomorrow, we're going to make the fuel line for this. I'm going to show you guys how to make DIY fuel line, but I'm so pumped for this. So with the clutch, everything came out like phenomenal. If we hop in here and we jump in, if you guys can like really see it, the clutch feels awesome. Like it feels incredibly good. We have a weird noise, but I mean, that's normal. So feels incredibly awesome. Super happy with the ACT just by feeling it so far. So hopefully it feels good for like daily driving aspects. I've heard a lot of good things about the ACT and how they actually feel. So with this stuff, like I said, everything's kind of tucked away. All the wiring's pretty much done. Power steering pump's been on. Alternator got put back on. AC condenser got put back on. Everything's plugged in, good to go. Wiring wise, technically this thing's like done with wiring for the most part until we get like the map sensor, throttle body, all that stuff like permanently mounted. But this is awesome. Awesome progress. We got the clutch in, no problem. Motor went in with minimal issues, like no issues actually it went in perfect, no issues at all. From the time we started the clutch, like total working time to get that clutch and the motor back in the car was maybe 45 minutes, at max. Focus on my face, there we go. But that, like I said, that's all we're doing tonight. Tomorrow we'll do all the fuel line. We'll get all the fuel line knocked out. It's cold though. It's like 30 degrees and I'm ready to go inside. I have to edit this video anyways. So if you guys like the video, go ahead and hit that like button. Also, in whatever color it turns, rainbow color, blue, pink, purple, green, red, amber, cyan, whatever color it might be. And I did get the Discord server live, so if you guys do want to jump in that, I will link it down below in the description. Feel free to go jump in the Discord server. Just keep everything like, just don't attack people, I guess. That's really the only rule. Free reign, just don't be an asshole. But anyways, if you guys haven't subscribed already to the channel, what are you waiting for? Like, why? What are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button. One of these corners, no idea which one I'll put it in quite yet. But with that, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out, homies.